Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. Folks, today we're going to talk about something that affects all of us. Remember, I'm not a doctor, I'm not your psychologist, your therapist, whatever. Go see those folks for professional assistance if needed. Now that we got that straight, conversation between friends and colleagues, right? But I am going to touch upon something that affects all of us, okay? Every single human on the planet. And it affects us pretty pervasively. It is fear, right? Well, yeah, right? You say, okay, thanks for opening up that can of worms, Steve. Where do we go with all this? Should be less serious, right? Well, maybe it should be. We'll see what happens, right? But fear, if you think about it, well, oftentimes we associate fear as negative, right? And true. There's truth to that. Fear. But what's the uh, what's the trigger for fear, right? The unknown, right? It really is about the unknown. I'm fearing something to come, right? And and or it may be fearing a state of being, right? I fear that this situation won't change, right? But it always seems to be about a motion or a movement in time, whether it be our own lives or situations. Now, oftentimes we'll dive in organizationally because that's where we mostly congregate as humans and teams. But really, a lot of these conversations that we have ripple outward, right? That's the whole idea behind the green domino, the good part of the green domino. But even the negative things, the red dominoes, those ripple out as well. So while we dive in with organizational culture, we have to understand that this touches every aspect, every relationship, everything that we do. Even if you're running solo and you don't have much going on, it might be, there's, I could go down a list that's a country mile long, right? Fear of being alone, right? Us single folks, it could be, and as we, start to get a little bit older or whatever, it could be a fear of being alone, right? There could be a fear, but not necessarily alone, but maybe the what ifs that happen that can occur from being alone. So if you're somebody who can't manage, say, physically, right, something is too much. Think of a widow who now has a farm, right, and maybe has a small circle, but not enough capability to manage said farm. Right. That's it. We'll go back in time. That's maybe an old school example, right? But it's an old school example that would apply to even modern times, right? It doesn't matter if you have a farm or an apartment, right? You know, the fear of a spouse. Sadly, there are those who have lost spouses, right? And the fear of, oh my gosh, if it's just me raising my children, right? Single parents, same way, right? Worrying about moms are the biggest bowl of fear that you ever want to know about regarding fearing for their children, right? Fearing for the possibilities, the what ifs and whatevers. I do find as I've gotten older as a man, as I've, all my kids are grown now, I have families and I have 8 grandkids, but I don't have a fear. I don't have a fear, but I definitely am safety minded. It's like, and that's another thing, we'll get into in a minute. But where to take this, where to follow the track logically relating to fear, right? But anyway, back to moms, right? Can't give them enough credit. My mom was intensely fearful that I would get hurt or something would happen, right? And she would come out. we lived in we lived in this apartment complex, and it kind of sat up, elevated a little bit, and there was a young boy who had gotten killed in the neighborhood electrically because of something that was not correctly done, and And so my mom went into alert mode. She was afraid and fearful every time I walked out of the house, and she would come out in the late afternoon or whatever, and she would yell my name, and as much as I love my mom, the one thing I hated was her screaming my name through through the entire, it's like she was standing on a mountaintop screaming, and I would run just so she could see me. I'm right here. I'm good. I'm safe. Quit freaking out. It's fine. But but that's what moms, right? And all parents. I'm not just saying moms, but moms really wear that fear on their sleeves, right? And and in some ways they're probably supposed to for a while, right? Now, tracking over time, you release that fear, and we can alleviate these fears, and we'll talk about some of that in a minute. But so moms are a big one, but it is really about the unknown's potential, right? The unknown potential. It's key to remember because this applies to you as an individual. This applies to a team. This applies to your family, your friend group, your community, your organizations, globally, right? Is that you're the status of where you are now and what could possibly occur, right? And there becomes a fear. And now that fear, when it's not dealt with properly, or if you tried to speed through it, in some of my other videos I talk about the isms with alcoholism, drug addictions, all these things, right? But that those become distractions from you dealing with actual fears. And when you try to suppress all those fears, then they start to burble up as anxieties. Driving down the road, you have an anxiety, right? And you don't know where it came from. All of a sudden, you're just like, right? Now, there's physiological things that can be tapped into and health related matters too, right? Uh, I'm telling you what, folks, caffeine, I realized that even myself, part of this, I could say a driver for fear is overthinking, okay? And yes, hi, I'm Steve. I'm an overthinker. But what I found is my caffeine intake, right, accelerated my thinking. So where I'm in, and I'm not like a crazy overthinker, but I'm a little bit overthinker. I'm not a hyper person, but I can overthink. And you add caffeine to that, or a Red Bull, or any mix of energy, anything that's going to affect my physiology like that. And while it is fine, you come off a 4 mile hike or more, I'm a wimp, I know, but you come off a hike or something and you have some of that and it kind of brings you back, right? It kind of gives you a little energy that you might, and that can kind of counterbalance fatigue and stuff like that. But when you're just kind of in norm state and you do a lot of caffeine and all this stuff, it accelerates your physiology, everything. And where do you think a lot of that goes? Your mind and your thoughts start spinning up. Now, if you had a concern about something before, that concern has just elevated itself into worry and into a fear. And it may be it's doing this, and it's not like you're looking around at folks and saying, hey, I'm fearful of this, I'm fearful of that. Your nature now is taking on, right, that emotion, that fearful emotion. You're taking on that fear, the what if scenarios, right? I've I've helped out many organizations, and there was a family company that I helped, and they had that in them. You could see it in their physiology, or in their manner. And as much as you could tell they were trying to be cool and all that, they were fearful, right? And I understand it. I understand the concept of fear. So this is another thing too. You go to a doctor, you go to anyone, right? Some people avoid all of that. Why? Fear, right? They're either afraid, to know something they don't know, or they're afraid that they'll, X, Y, Z, one, two, three, other, right? And so it's fear. I can tell you right now, I'm not a fan of the MRI, right? Just not. It's an unnatural thing. They need to fix that. If you're out there and you design MRIs, I think we're smart enough that we can come up with a new system instead of throwing people in a straw and for 45 minutes to an hour. My dad got stuck in one for almost an hour, and the power went out, and he was over 6 feet tall. And the gal who was running this test was apparently 100 pounds soaking wet, and it took him 40 minutes to get him out because she had to go find somebody to help her. And that was old school systems. But anyway, so these are the kinds of things that make you do what? You start to go, oh, well, now I didn't have a fear. But then he told me that, and I thought, oh, okay, so nervousness, maybe some little bit of nervousness, a little concern to nervousness to maybe a little worrisome that can turn into a fear. And what do these fears turn into? Turn into phobias. Because also it isn't just the fear of the unknown, but the what if outcomes, right? What if XYZ doesn't happen, right? To pull back from the real fearful stuff, because people have some intense phobias. I don't even want to talk about them because sometimes just talking about this stuff triggers people. The irony, though, is same thing that might trigger you is probably the same thing that's going to heal you. Because once you get it out of your system, you tell somebody about it, family, friend, whoever, counselor, et cetera, you've given it up, right? You've released it, you've let it go. And you let go of that fear. Once you can use the broader, easier concerns of, well, I don't want to be alone the rest of my life. If that is a fear and a worry, how do you conquer it? Be alone for a long period of time. Be alone for weeks or months. I don't mean like completely alone on a desert island, but like don't be in a relationship, right? If you're a single person, obviously. Don't be in a relationship. Sit with yourself. And then figure out, it's like, oh, well, you know what? I can dress my own wounds. I can feed my own face. I can wash my own clothes. You start to realize, well, I need to be more self-sufficient, right? And this kind of leads me, and I don't want to dive too deep into all the fears, as you can tell, because I don't want to trigger people. That's not my intention here. But understand that there is a ramping up of fear, right? So let's slip into some ways to resolve or just to at least gently kind of approach this. The whole idea, and especially, okay, we'll even use the biblical. Jesus said, fear not, right? Throughout all of the text, fear not. And I don't know, it's a ridiculous amount of times, like over 140 times or something of that nature. Fear not, some version of fear not. Because you're what? Giving it power, right? You're giving it power. Now, it's easy to say that, but it's another thing to really get to that place, right? But intellectually, understand it's really starting in your head. It's really starting with your thoughts. And sometimes people will put those thoughts. I told you about how my dad told me that story, so naturally I had like this concern now, right? It's the same thing. You ever had a friend that, you tell them, oh, I'm going to go do this? Well, let me tell you about let me tell you about a time when XYZ happened, and what are they doing? They're basically trying to pass you their fear. They probably don't realize they're doing it. They're just sharing, but that's what happens. And so what do you think happens when people start shoving fears? Now, you can look at this organizationally. You can look at this individually. It doesn't matter what group we're talking about. But if you're perpetuating fear into others, do you think you're healing? Do you think you're helping? No. You're not. You're pushing that fear into somebody else's lap and making them what? Overthink. Now, think about a team. Oh, be careful of so-and-so. We're playing, I'm using sports just to keep it light. Think, hey, we're playing so-and-so tonight. They're just unstoppable and they're just ridiculous. And maybe you already know that, right, from the media and all this kind of stuff. And how tough they are, You've already given them power just on their reputation. It's the same way with so-and-so that runs a company, they're really gruff and they're just, they're tough to deal with, You've already preloaded and prejudged and there's a latent fear there over this individual. And maybe when we grow up, you're afraid to tell your parents how you did on a test or your grades, right? There's a fear, right? And so we can see this and go, oh, okay, well, this starts early in life, right? We're right out of the gate. we're conditioning young people to fear, right? Instead of, hey, this glass is half full of water. Let's see how much more water we can get into it. We say, oh, we only have half a glass of water. We have to be careful. Now, if you did grow up, excuse me, I didn't grow up having much, had a lovely family, but didn't have much, but it definitely wasn't, hey, we have a half a glass of water. Let's try to put more water in here. This is fantastic. It wasn't necessarily that approach. It was, oh my gosh, we only have a half a glass of water, right? And while we shouldn't waste resources, right, on the conservation side, we can obsess, right? We can obsess, and it becomes a lack mindset. And that lack mindset, again, comes from fear. We aren't going to have enough, right? Where do you think that people feel like they have to steal? Why do you think most crimes are committed? They're not committed because people have abundance, or that people have manifested abundance in their life. That those things have occurred because of fears that have now manifested into their manner, their lifestyle, their actions, literally, right? And those actions are to, hey, I need to take care of this, and everybody else be damned, right? So you can see where fear just puts its fingers on everything going on in the world, right? So fear not. But it starts with the mind. Control the mind, you control fear, right? But you also have to realize too that your emotion compounds this, right? It's a heart-head equation, right? So your mind will start overthinking it, right? But then your heart will feel that, right? It will feel the imagery or the vision that you're putting out of that fear. And now you've created that, and it's living inside of you. So now you have to reverse that. First of all, control your thoughts, slow it down, right? Slow it down, don't fixate, don't obsess. And it's easy for me to say that, but don't over focus on it. Focus on other things to begin with. But also, if you have to go through a thing, so it's not like you can avoid it, right? I'm not saying avoid problems, but I'm saying as you're going through it or about to or coming up and that sort of thing, maybe you have a big interview, right? A big interview or performance or something significant, right? See it going well, right? You talked in previous videos about using your imagination, right? And visualization. This is where imagination and visualization can help you, right? If you're going to have thoughts, focus them on the good outcome. This is how it's going to go. This is how it's going to go. And if it changes a little bit, I'm going to be able to adjust and it's going to go well, right? Because maybe you're going to be in a tangle. You're going to be in a rough, emotional or intellectually challenging meeting with someone that's going to be tough, right? It may be technically challenging. It may be administratively. It may be business oriented. It may be all of the things, right? Depending on who you are and what we're talking about. See it going well, so that when you go in there, you're not fixated on the problem. You're focused on the solution. How can I get wins for me, for who I'm negotiating with, and for the customers, right? If you want to think about it that way. It could be customers, could be your family, your friends, your community, whatever, right? Depending on what you're talking about. But get wins. Focus on the wins. Focus on the outcome being a favorable one, right? Because if you wasted all your horsepower worrying about all the things that could come up. Now, that isn't to say, let's say you're putting together a presentation. It isn't to say that you have a critical eye and say, no, they wouldn't understand this, or I need to say it a different way. That's not fear or worry, okay? And don't let that become fear. I'm fearful, or I'm worried or concerned that this doesn't convey what I'm saying. Don't even put that language to it. No, it needs to be, I want to make this so that they really get it, right? Always the glass is half full. How can we make it more full, right? Not a lack mindset, not that negative mindset. Okay, so we talked about fear. Now let's talk a little bit about, while fear is potentially our enemy, by putting fear as our enemy, we're actually creating more fear. right? The topic alone may have made you go, oh, I'm a little fearful of watching that because I don't want to talk about fear because it triggers me or whatever. But to be honest with you, the whole concept of avoiding fearful things brings more fearful things in your mind. You are merely just creating a dam, damming back a lake of fear that is filling up again, and then it'll pop out at some point as anxiety, and it'll escape because you can't drive it back. All you can do is say, "Yeah, I had a fear. It was, it was a concern. I was worried. It was a fear." Because you're not going to be able to turn this off, folks. It's going to take mental practice, your heart and head working together, and then focus. Use your visualization and imagination to see things in a positive. Don't overthink, right? But we can't just push it off to the side. We can't dumb it down. We can't get into obsessive behaviors, right? Excessive behaviors to distract ourselves because it will not go away. Rather than see fear as an enemy, although I'll probably have to couch it this way so that you understand where we're going, you need to see fear as a friend, right? And I don't mean like a good friend, but like that friend that drives you nuts, but is truthful, right? A friend that is truthful, but drives you a little batty, right? Okay. You want to see that fear as that. And why is that? Because that fear is telling you there's something that you haven't dealt with. You haven't dealt with conflict in your personal life. You haven't dealt with conflict in your professional life, in your community, right? Maybe you're very divisive and maybe intellectually volatile or whatever it might be. All of us are different. We have different things. How do we come across? How are we impacting, the world around us? You may be fearful that your reputation is going down the tubes, right? Because of something you said or you did. And that fear is elevated, and it's going to do what? It's going to keep growing until you deal with it. How do you deal with it? You make amends. You send out apologies. You forgive people. You ask for forgiveness. You heal, right? That's part of healing. When you heal, these fears will start to shrink down, That fear is telling you there's something unresolved. You got to go inside and figure out what that thing is. It could be familial, relationships, with your parents and, loved ones and so forth. It could be your friend group. It could be the community, whatever. And while sometimes you can do intellectual, coach yourself intellectually, and that's fine. Ultimately, you have to ask yourself, is there something I need to go outside of myself to heal, right? Because it involves other people. It could be if you're an organization, it could be that you've really nefariously laid off. We'll say that you're at the site level, but you're kind of at the, you're doing work at the pleasure of the ownership. You've had to do maybe lay off a whole lot of people, and your heart is hurt, right? And you're fearful that they think that you're the cause of it when you weren't. It was a math thing or it was a this thing. And this is weighing on you, these types of fears, right? These fears that, and how do those manifest? Again, obsessive behaviors. Maybe I'm overeating. Maybe I'm drinking too much. Maybe I'm anything too much, right? To numb myself. and it's a coping mechanism, right? If you need a coping mechanism, that means there's something unresolved. I would say before the unresolved, there's a fear. Why don't you want to resolve this? You have a fear. I don't want this to get worse. You may be fearful that the situation, I'm just going to make it worse by bringing something up again, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if that's the case, then you absolutely need to deal with it. Because if you don't, because at any point, you're going to figure out, hey, whoever's still holding on to it, that's theirs now. You let it go. You did your part. There's people that I remember. I'm over 50, and I remember when I turned 50, there was a couple people I wanted to reach out to and just say, hey, blah blah blah, and because I remember I was maybe a bit, a little bit of a, loose with my verbiage growing up as a young person, and they're like, oh, forget about it. It's not a thing. But it was weighing on me because I didn't accept the guy that I am now doesn't accept and it wasn't like I was a bad guy, just, a couple individuals that I had said some stuff to that I really shouldn't have said such things to. And, but the older adult needed, was basically admonishing the younger adult who I once was, and felt like that needed to be healed, right? Irrespective. And so I reached out to that individual and said, look, I really apologize. I was kind of an ass. And oh, don't even worry about it. Da, 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 da. Well, turned out that that individual ended up getting cancer and passed away. And while, that's absolutely tragic, right? I'm so thankful that I reached out and did that and healed that, right? And it wasn't a fear that I had, but it was somewhere in my psyche. It was something that I had remembered, right? Even decades later, many decades later, right? And that's just a small example, right? There's a plethora of examples we have throughout all of our culture, all of our lives, right? And this isn't just relegated to you with your friends or family. This is community, right? This happens where bridges are burned in the community. If you want to heal, in a quick hurry, and you're on more of a public stage, do a town hall, invite, friends and, what was your foes, say, and say, look, hey, I apologize, this, that, and the other thing, or host a dinner or something of that nature. Create a bridge, bridge of healing, right? Call it what you will, but do that. You can heal a whole community doing such things, and you're better served in the long run, not only to heal yourself, but to heal connections within the community. Now imagine community-wide these things going on, right? Where people band together. It used to be that people of all stripes would come together and during different times, a lot of times during the holidays, and do fundraisers, and they kind of put their differences aside. It's become less so that this occurs. It doesn't mean you can't awaken this mentality, right? This approach, this approach in dealing with issues. And now you might be asking, well, what does this have to do with fear? Well, because when you don't do these things live inside of you. They affect your health. They affect, how you operate. You may be cynical, crass. I came across somebody when I was doing some stuff, and another person that I grew up with, who I just thought was wonderful, right? But then at my elevated age now, I'm not that old, but elevated age, come across this individual, and I was all like, oh, hey, how you doing? This person is so cynical, so crass, was rude, all of these things. And I thought, just out of the blue, I mean, they didn't say anything, it was just kind of a, hey, how you doing kind of thing, and was blown away at the person they had become, right? The one had gone from being, maybe, another person was more of a recipient of a thing. There was healing there. Another one, had good stuff going on, had turned into a better person, right? So do you think these fears go away? No, they live inside of you. They become part of your personality. They become part of how you treat and what you think you can and how you can treat other people. And it's just not acceptable on any level. And what will happen is that eventually we'll circle back around. It may be not maybe this year or next year or a decade later, but eventually if you're putting out bad seed, then you're not, you're going to reap bad harvest. I mean, it's physics, folks. It's just physics. And so what are we talking about here? We're talking about dealing with things that are creating problems within your life. Go back in, and you're going to have to cross that bridge and deal with those fears. Fear of somebody saying something rude or whatever it is, right? Whatever your fear is, fear of, it may be even be, you may be a person who's so prideful that you're afraid that if you apologize for something that I'll be less than. No, you won't. You will be 3 times more in that person's eyes than you ever were before by being genuine, being real, loving, and you're protecting love, right? I talked about that in the book, protecting love. This is how you protect love, is you have to acknowledge what is driving your fear, worm into it, you know, attempt to fix those issues. You're not going to be able to fix everything, right, folks? But if you know about it, this is the other part about the intellectual side. Once you know about it, once your brain has acknowledged this process, right, then you can sit back, and even those who don't, say you try to make amends and they don't accept it or whatever, you're okay with that because you did your part, right? You did your part. And now you may realize, well, it wasn't emanating. There was nothing emanating from me in the beginning. It's always been maybe somebody else pushing that, right? You did your part. You let go of it. You're moving on. You're light as a feather, right? You want that heart light as a feather. You don't want enemies. You don't want to be at war with anybody else. That doesn't mean people won't be, choose to make you an enemy or be at war with you. But that's a choice they make out of what? Out of fear. What are they afraid of? Some people are afraid. Some people are afraid about the conversation to talk about fear or to talk about all the isms and the things that distract people and all the coping mechanisms, because they're afraid that imagine if all the coping mechanisms were gone and nobody had alcohol, drugs, or any excessive behaviors, right, that they could indulge in. Let's just say that wasn't feasible now. What would you do then? You'd have to sit with yourself. You'd have to sit with nothing in the middle, right? And it's in that quiet sitting with yourself, meditating, praying, right? And letting some of this wash over you, what will be revealed is, oh, this fear is a call to action. It's a call to healing. And if you see it from that light, fear is no longer your enemy. Fear is an identifier. And now you can, once you see this, you can't unsee this, folks. I'm telling you, you can walk down the street, people you know, people you used to know, whatever it is, people you never knew, and you can see fear in their life. You can see somebody who's afraid. Now, this isn't to go, oh, they're fearful. No, it's to be, you're now capable of being a help in others' lives when you can see that they have that fear. And then what do? Yes, you can alleviate some fears, but it's better to have the tools, right? I can tell you, don't fear anymore. It's super easy. Yeah, you'd be like, Steve, it's ridiculous. I have anxieties. I have all this stuff going on. Yeah, telling you that isn't going to get it done, right? It's having the mechanisms and tools. Understand the relationship between your heart and your head, right? And then taking actions to make things right, which is the healing, right? And when you've done that, you've done your part, and then you can let it go. You can let it go. If others can't let it go, it's not your problem, right? All right, folks. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember to hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When we do this, not only are we helping to transform culture for the better, but we're transforming our own lives as well. At the same time, remember, we can't transform anything on the outside if we're not willing to transform ourselves on the inside. It's super important. All right, folks, hit like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.